I'm inviting Amnon Raz Karkotzkin, the head of Jewish Studies in Van Leer Institute and a teacher of history, Jewish history in Be'er Sheva University.
Ben Gurion University.
Ben Gurion.
Of the Negev.
Of the Negev. Please.
Thank you, Gal. It's not only an honor and a pleasure to celebrate with Rivka, and it is a great honor. It is also, like to many others here, an opportunity for me to reflect on my own work, because in no way I can think about my way without recognizing my deep debt to Rivka. It is impossible. In fact, my very impression of the academy, my first experience, was with Rivka. My first year as an undergraduate student, the first day, 8 o'clock in the morning. Strange decision for someone for whom at that time 8 o'clock was the middle of the night. But a decision that turned to be of dramatic consequences for me. Between Salutati, Pico, Hans Baron, Burckhardt, Machiavelli, Francis Yates, and Bruno and Bruni, Elkanah and Funkenstein, Galileo, of course, and excuse me for the incoherence of this list, but you see, it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't distinguish between Renaissance intellectuals and modern historians. And in fact, this is Rivka, because we always moved between them, and the dual perspective that she provides us there was, of course, crucial for me and for others. All the questions that still occupy me were there. Science and religion, the entire issue of secularization in that sense, modernity, historiography and ideology, even Christian Hebraism that occupied me later. We were even the first to have the privilege to read Rivka's seminal composition on Galileo and the Church in the format of the dissertation she just completed at that period. All I've done since then brings me back to this class that took me to unexpected paths, something that I couldn't think of a day before. I really don't know why I chose it. I think that the title, Intellectual History, to help with the hesitations why to study history, accompanied me, and suddenly here, intellectual history. And it was indeed one of the best decisions in my life, in spite of the hour. Of course, and since then, there are many. Rivka's obvious deep impact on my life and ways of thinking turned to be obvious and direct when only a few years later, I turned to study the censorship of Hebrew books at the 16th century. In the same context, the same institution, even with one of Rivka's best friends, Cardinal Roberto Bellarmine, although as a younger Bellarmine. I knew him in earlier years. She knew an older person. I was younger. But Rivka's impact is also obvious on studies on other topics, mainly my later discussions of modern historiography and secularism. Since then, I had the privilege to learn much more, to work with Rivka, and to be inspired again and again, while the first meeting brought us to share many other interests, and her impact on my studies is obvious and fundamental. Later, I had many other teachers, but Rivka remains of special and unique significance, not only because she was the first, because she remained there always in different times and in many possibilities. My first intention was to deal with issues in which I deal now, but then I realized that for this occasion, it's more important for me to try to think about general issues and to go back to the beginning, to the 16th century, to the Inquisitor and the Jews. It was also unexpected at that time that I will study Jewish histories and Jewish literature. I hardly knew things about these topics before, and then what was interesting is that I realized that Reuven Bunfield, that turned to be my supervisor at the MA thesis. Rivka left us at that period to different countries. Share the critical approach and have similar aspects. At the time, he published his critical account on the historiography of Italian Jews in the Renaissance and post-Renaissance, arguing against the conventional narrative that described the Renaissance as a period of coexistence and toleration to be followed by the dark counter-reformation and oppression of the Jews. He did argue the opposite, but he emphasized the oppressive dimensions to be found in Renaissance attitudes toward the Jews, and on the other hand, the cultural exchange during the ghetto period, after the establishment of the ghettos. He did not idealize the period, but put him in the context. In retrospective, I think that this special sensitivity of Jewish historians to early modern Catholicism is interesting, and I wanted to deal with it also today. This is the title, but I will touch it only indirectly. In fact, I will more refer to the title of the conference itself than to the title I gave before I started working on it. Rivka herself didn't deal with Jewish issues, but it is her sensitivity and framework that directed me in various ways in this work. I took Rivka's observation to Jewish issues and still reflected on the relevance for these topics. So, in fact, I try to bring Rivka with me to what is called the problematic topic, Jewish studies. Censorship of Hebrew books is perhaps not identical to the question of science, although we deal with similar issues. The insertion of bodies of knowledge into the Catholic world, the discussion of knowledge within this issue, a continuous... לא שומעים אותי טוב? גבוה. אני בסדר? מה? קרב? לא, אני לא חד קרב, זה לא, כואב לי הגב. אני לא הכי גבוה שדיבר פה על הבעל. הנה, ככה זה טוב? לא. מה? לא ככה. רגע, נשתה מים. ככה זה טוב? I try. I will try. What? אתה
המיקוד של הרב שלי, תשתדל לדבר באותה פוזיציה, כי אנחנו רוצים לשמוע אותך.
I will try. I will do my best. It's something, but of course the question of the Hebrew literature is a little bit different. Somehow I will locate it between Galileo and Menocchio, the hero of another teacher of mine. And I think that this location between the two is crucial, because both from a methodological point of view and also from the principle of knowledge. Yes, the Jews are not Menocchio. They have the voice of their own. They have the way to respond. The censor is familiar with them because he himself usually was a convert. But it's not Galileo. It's not Galileo, and I will try to say about a few words. My work on censorship was interpreted by some as a defense of the Catholic inquisitor, the convert. That, of course, is not the case. I still think that I also maybe think that the Jews were right. But I'm more ambivalent. The case was to view his role in the formation of Jewish culture at the time, and on another level to analyze modern historiography and modern Jewish consciousness that followed that of the converts, to realize the limits of Western secularism on the one hand, and to try to think about it in different words. That's from retrospective, of course. I didn't know that it will lead me to this large framework when I was working on it. The way historiography that condemned the censor evidently followed his principles and values, that was my main issue. That we condemn the censors, we condemn the burning, but basically the culture to which we, and I think, and I will talk about the we at the end of my words, are following similar attitude to what he himself established, mainly the denial of any Jewish polemics with Christianity as a precondition for tolerating the Jews, the denial of many of aspects of Jewish literature as authoritative, Jewish Talmudic literature as authoritative. The burning of the Talmud in 1553 to 59 was a remarkable event, although of course it should be taken in the context of many burnings and many and the establishment of Inquisition of the inquisitorial index and inquisitorial censorship at that time. But it was a most remarkable, fundamental, I would say, event. Besides its traumatic effect on the Jewish communities that found their ways to continue learning the composition, the event determined the boundaries of modern Western culture and the terms of the discussion of the Jews and the limits of the generation, for generations, the limits of toleration for generations. One can see it as a manifestation of the disenchantment, the denial of the Talmud, a threat to Christianity. The Talmud indeed was first burned in the 13th century, and and in that sense there is a continuity. The difference is, first of all, in amounts. When Pfefferkorn argued to burn the Talmud at the beginning of the 16th century, there was a limited number of copies. He was not successful. But 50 years later, or 40 years later, you have already 5 printed editions of the Talmud between 1520 and 1553, and 5 editions of the Talmud. Each of them had 18 to 24 volumes, each in 1,500 copies, means huge burnings, a real event. I don't think that there were bigger burnings at the period, according to what I know, and there were huge burnings, of course, of many other books, and of course, of many other people as well. But the burning is more interesting. And the burning is a starting point for me in the time I have to deal about modernity in 2 ways. First, what I just said, and I will turn to it later. The burning as a way to realize the limits of toleration and the boundaries of the toleration of the Jews later. Second, the burning also brings us to think about Jewish modernity in different terms. Because what is striking is that we should notice that it was not the content that had been condemned and was burned by the church. On the contrary, during the years surrounding the burning of the Talmud, most of the Talmudic literature was published in new forms. First, when I wrote about censorship many years ago, I didn't notice that at the same years, the Mishnah, the text on which the Talmud is founded, was printed with permission of the church. In the same year, the Talmud was burned in Cremona. The Mishnah that appears in the Talmud as fragments on which the Talmudic text is based, the Mishnah as a unique composition, something that did not, something that we didn't have before as an independent composition, was published. Besides that, new books that include Talmudic literature were published. The first, Ein Yaakov, that includes the legends of the Talmud, and the second, the monumental Bet Yosef, that was written at these years by the great Jewish legislator, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who lived at that time in Safed. In fact, the years of the burning were the moment, the years of the burning were occurred in a moment which was crucial for the development of Jewish culture, mainly in this special center in Safed, North Palestine, in the Galilee. In Safed, they turned to be momentarily an amazing center of Jewish original thinking. That included first Rabbi Yosef Karo, who at the years in which the Talmud was burned, composed his bestseller, the Shulchan Aruch, the Set Table, a book of codification that was what is important, and I have no time to deal with it. I thought that I will concentrate on it. A book that what is important about it is that it reflects print consciousness in all aspects. It's the unification of the law. It's a part of you should see it as part of a beginning of civilizing process. As I suggested elsewhere, this should be seen as the beginning of modernity, of Jewish culture, if modernity has any meaning. Usually, Jewish modernity is concerned as the denial of the Jewish law, but it is not. So the Jewish law is permitted. The Talmud, the source of Jewish law, is burned, but the law itself is permitted, but it is permitted in condition that it will be considered as the legal system of an ethnicity, as a custom book, not as something of authority. Moreover, the Index of Trent, 1964, argues that the Talmud can be published in case it will not contain anti-Christian elements, but without the title Talmud. Without the title as a signal of authority, the title as mentioning a Torah. It can be published. The content can be published. But not that. Safed, indeed, what is interesting, that without direct control of the church, did not develop a new trend which does not contain anti-Christian element as a central source, unlike medieval Jewish text. It was transformed into what should be seen in retrospect as a resistance to progressive history, something that has a huge influence on later Jewish thought, from Hasidism to Walter Benjamin, who knew about it through Sholem. But what is interesting is that moment, and that on this level, we talk about a different kind of modernity. The other Jewish later modernity, Jewish later historiography, was based on the denial of this heritage. This was considered as Jewish tradition versus modernity. My argument is that what we call Jewish tradition is modern. It was established at that moment. It was not there before. Later, also, indeed, not only the Talmud was condemned as the core of Jewish secularism, but also the law. Also the perception of the law. What is interesting in Safed is the law was considered as part of the messianic process. As Robert Cover, the noted American legal scholar, said, Safed is an attempt to bring the Messiah from within the law, not against the law. But in fact, what is from here, from the center, indeed turned to say what are the limits of the Jews, both in the ghetto and later, without polemic against Christianity, without the demand for authentic knowledge based on the Talmud. Of course, there are many attitudes towards it in modern Jewish thinking. There are many attitudes towards the Jews, but I think that we can generalize and say something and do it as well. It is more interesting when we think about the role of Christian ambivalence towards the Jews in the constitution of modernity. How many minutes I have?
3.
3? I wanted to finish, I will do it, with 2 quotations of Carlo Ginzburg, for which I thought about Rivka's work and also of mine, and then to conclude with some words of Rivka. 2 observations in different ways. When he talked about the Inquisition in the 16th century, Ginzburg said, despite the emotional solidarity that we feel for the victims of the persecution, intellectually we tend to identify with the inquisitors and the bishops, even when they are not like Nicholas of Cusa. I think it's crucial. It's crucial, of course, for popular culture. It is part. It was written in ecstasies, but it is crucial for our own discussion of our own issue, and our own is based on another quotation in a different context of Ginzburg, when he talked in an article dedicated to the memory of Amos Funkelstein, when he talks about Augustine and argues, at the end, I will not give you the argument. I'm proposing that we can see in this ambivalence a secularized projection of the Christian ambivalence towards the Jews. This ambivalence, the ambivalence of modern historical perception, the ambivalence of the Hegelian perception of history. Following that observation, he concluded that our way of knowing the past is imbued with the Christian attitude of superiority towards the Jews. In other terms, the phrase Verus Israel, in as much as it is the self-definition of Christianity, is also the matrix of the conception of historical truth that remain, and here I deliberately use he, and all-embracing terms, our own. Our own. We are in both sides when we are writing the history of the Jews. That's the advantage of someone who comes to learn Jewish history from Rivka Feldhay. This is the advantage of something that the first term he learned when he tried to write his first historical essay was indeed ambivalence. What we need, perhaps, is to bring back to our discourse the Jewish ambivalence towards Christianity, towards progressive history, to go back to Safed in order to reflect in different ways on post-modernity and secularization. Thank you.